Hello internet world. In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to paint a portrait without first drawing it, all Alla Prima, and quite hard. Straight down to the weakest spot you want it. It's not always like that, but a lot of the time it is. So in this second method I like to use, I like to start out with the shape of the head itself. I try and get the chin, the bone structure of the sides, so cheekbones and everything else, the ears, and then from there you move to the smaller shapes afterwards. And by shapes, I mean, if you were to look at the forehead with the hairline and the eyebrows, what shape would that be? Would it be rectangular? Because the hairline sort of rounds at the top, would that be slightly skewed from the rectangle? That's what you need to think about. There I just added in some lines as purely tiny bits of guides. None of what I put down is accurate. I'm just relying on later on finding the portrait. One thing you should also always do is put the background in before you start doing anything else, because then you can judge the skin tones accurately off the backgrounds. If you just paint the face itself and then later on put in the background, you'll see it's a bit skewed. You didn't quite get things accurate. But putting that background in gives you something accurate to judge things off of, especially when you have a bright background like this one. It sort of tells you what value the skin color should be. Next, I'm more so mixing skin tones on the face itself. I'm not trying to get it right on the palette. I don't really care. I can put out as much paint as I want, and then I want the fun of trying to find that portrait. So here I'm just doing little bits of tests on the skin tone until I get it just right. It also helps when doing a portrait like this where it's a little bit brushy to have thicker, more bristled brushes. It's always good to have variety in case you want to soften areas. The smooth brush will do very nicely. But that's one thing you need to think of always. What brush should I use for this particular section? It's also good to use a larger brush than you would think, because then you can do larger sweeps and then it just looks more natural. It's easier to blend that way with a big face, then go to smaller brushes later on when you're doing details. Here the portrait is starting to take a little bit of form. I'm looking at the separation between the bottom of the chin where the shadow starts and up where the cheekbones are, how it's a little bit lighter where the light's hitting, because the light's coming from above. That's one thing you need to think of always as well. Where is the light coming from? What sort of color is the light? And what color are the shadows because of that light? Also, if any of you think I'm going too fast or this is too hard, toughen up, buttercup. If you don't get this now, you'll get it later. I say this because I keep getting messages that some of my tutorials are too hard, but doesn't that mean you're learning something? Doesn't that mean that you have something there to learn? Go look at the easier tutorials, then come back to mine if you want. So here I'm starting to define where the actual proportions are. So I'm getting the eyes accurate, the eyebrows according to the eyes accurate, and the nose. I'm trying to judge everything off one another to get accuracy in the portrait itself. It's always good to look at painting like sculpting. Although you're trying to do it in 2 dimensions, which is a bit harder, if you look at it that way, you think of the form in your head rather than just seeing this flat image. Then you can create something more 3D from that. One good rule to follow, which I didn't necessarily do in this one, is to save your darkest darks and your lightest lights for the last step. That way you really get rid of false accents or getting those incorrect. Because once you go from the bigger shapes to the smaller shapes, it shows you where everything is just naturally. Just as a sculptor will start from a big lump of clay, or a sculptor will start with a big hunk of marble, you have to get those big sections off first before you can start going to the smaller sections and making them smooth and soft. That's the same as leaving the highlights and the darkest darks till the very end. Another thing to think about is the direction of the brush strokes themselves. So if you look at the right eye going down to the mouth, I've tried to have that stroke contour the form itself. So that way it looks more realistic rather than just blending things all together. But I should say I'm not trying to go for full realism in this painting. I only did this painting in 3 hours, and I didn't start with a sketch. That's not really what you want to do if you want full realism in a painting. This is just me testing my skills as far as I can. Can I get it right in 3 hours? Even when I'm using thick paint, and I started with no sketch, which is quite hard. Here I'm starting to define the eyes that much more. And you can see I'm starting to make things a little bit wider and darker in the eyes too, starting to make them a little bit more realistic. I will say, when you actually put the whites in an eye, don't put just pure white. They're never just pure white. The only time you have pure white in an eye is when a highlight is there. When your eyes are really wet, the light's hitting it, and then there's that few pixels, this tiny section of white. The rest is a little bit above white. It's closer to the skin tone at times as well. Color temperature also plays a factor as well. So say there's some warm light, some orangish light, and it's going right down to the skin, to the eyes. The eye is going to pick up that little bit of orangeness. And because shadows contrast the light, it will be the opposite of orange. The opposite of orange is blue. So say you have some orange sort of light, that means you'll have some bluish in the shadows. Don't make everything orange, blue, or anything like that. Just remember that everything is relative. If there's warm light, that means there's cool shadows. If there's neutral light, then that sort of goes away. Like if you have purely white light that isn't warm or cool, that changes things completely and it becomes what the natural color of that skin tone is. Okay, I'm starting to realize this is going to be hard for a lot of you. But at the same time, all the knowledge is there. Just listen to it at your own pace. If something doesn't make sense, scroll back a little bit. Feel free to leave a comment below and I'll try and help you out. Just try your hardest. Don't beat yourself up. It's all a learning process. Also, in these brushy portraits, feel free to leave a few things unrendered. Like as you can see the hair, I'm not going in and doing every strand. I'm just leaving it as a mass. The way I like to see it is if you have crisp eyes like the portrait currently has and the rest is soft, your eyes are going to go right for those eyes because it's the most realistic detailed thing in the painting itself. It just draws you in. The rest you don't care about. Those eyes though, they will pull you right in. This, however, is all personal choice, what feels right to you. And that's how you develop your style. You just keep doing what is right to you, what feels good, what do you like? And then from there, style will just build. Here we're starting to get closer to the end of the portrait. At this stage, it's about 3 hours in, and I could do more sittings the next day. The next day, I could then glaze it, but sometimes you just like the freshness of a portrait that was pulled together like this. It just has an air to it that a portrait that's very realistic doesn't have. It has energy. The next portrait though, I might make realistic just to show you the difference. I hope you liked the tutorial. Rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time for whatever tutorial speed painting I do.